Joy rarely leaves with drama. It doesn't slam the door behind it. It doesn't scream or shatter or cry. It slips away quietly, disguised as fatigue, as distraction, as just another Tuesday. For many men, the disappearance of joy isn't marked by a breakdown. It's marked by function. He wakes up, goes to work, answers emails, smiles when appropriate. He might even laugh. But beneath it all, there's a silence. Not around him, within him. This is the kind of suffering psychology often misses, because it hides in plain sight. No clinical diagnosis, no crisis, just a slow erosion of aliveness. Philosopher Martin Heidegger once warned of the falling, a life lived inauthentically, buried under routine, forgetting to question why we do what we do. Psychologist Carl Jung called it the loss of soul, when a man becomes disconnected from his inner world, his instincts, his meaning. It doesn't happen overnight. It begins with a subtle shift. The music no longer moves you. The hobbies feel empty. Conversations lack depth. Your world still spins, but you're not in it anymore. Joy, in its truest form, isn't just happiness. It's a sense of being alive, of having something within you that's worth waking up for. When that flicker dims, men often don't talk about it. They just adapt. They carry on. They disappear behind roles: worker, husband, father, provider. But inside, something sacred, something essential, is quietly shutting down. This article isn't about burnout or depression alone. It's about a subtler death, the kind that happens with your eyes open, the kind that looks like success on the outside but feels like emptiness inside. And yet, this is not a eulogy, it's a mirror, because psychology, philosophy, and lived experience all suggest the same truth. Joy can return, but only if we're willing to stop, look closely, and name the habits that are silently stealing it from us. This is not a list of symptoms. It's a descent into the unseen emotional lives of men who've quietly lost their joy, and perhaps a pathway back. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from overwork, but from underliving. It starts subtly. A man wakes up to an alarm, brushes his teeth in silence, drives to work, performs, produces, returns home, scrolls, sleeps, repeats. He's not in crisis. He's in autopilot. On paper, everything looks fine. He has structure, stability, predictability. But beneath the surface, something essential has begun to rot: his sense of presence. Psychologists refer to this as existential numbness, a condition not of chaos, but of endless repetition without meaning. As the days blur together, time becomes weight instead of wonder. He is no longer living his life, he is simply managing it. People become neurotic when they content themselves with inadequate or wrong answers to the questions of life, Carl Jung warned. In Jungian terms, this man is trapped in the persona, the mask he wears to survive society. He becomes so fused with his roles, worker, husband, father, that he forgets the man underneath. And slowly, he begins to confuse performance with purpose. But routines aren't the enemy. It's the absence of ritual. Routines are mechanical. Rituals are meaningful. Making coffee can be a routine, or it can be a sacred pause. Taking a walk can be a commute, or it can be a return to the body. The difference lies not in the activity, but in the presence of soul. In the philosophy of Søren Kierkegaard, despair wasn't always loud. He believed the most dangerous form of despair is not knowing that one is in despair. It is living through repetition with no connection to spirit, no intentionality, no why. And this is how joy disappears, not with pain, but with grayness. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. Carl Jung. He doesn't call back, not because he's busy, but because he doesn't know what he'd say. Once the loudest laugh in the room, he now declines invitations with vague excuses. I've just got a lot going on. I'm tired. I'll make it next time. But next time never comes. This isn't social anxiety. It's something quieter, a loss of emotional resonance. He no longer feels seen, even among familiar faces. The conversations feel hollow, the laughter forced, the connection drained of color. Psychology recognizes this as social withdrawal, often the earliest symptom of internal disconnection, not from others, but from self. In Jungian terms, this is the effect of an unintegrated shadow, the repressed, unspoken parts of the self that fester in silence. When a man loses touch with his deeper emotions, pain, grief, uncertainty, he can no longer bring his whole self into relationship. Instead, he begins to isolate, not because he hates others, but because he feels inauthentic in their presence. He fears being asked, "How are you really?" because he doesn't know. As French philosopher Albert Camus once wrote, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. But to reach that summer, one must first acknowledge the winter, and most men are never taught how." Masculine conditioning often teaches men to be self-reliant, stoic, unshakable. But in denying their vulnerability, they also deny themselves communion, the very thing that sustains joy. True connection requires exposure. It requires a man to step outside of the roles he performs and say, "This is me, not the strong version, just me." The unlived life is a sickness. Carl Jung. It starts with a shrug. The guitar gathers dust in the corner. The hiking boots stay under the bed. The paintbrushes remain untouched, their colors still sealed inside dry tubes. He tells himself he's just busy, that he'll get back to it soon, that he's just not in the mood. But the mood never returns. And quietly, the things that once made life feel vivid begin to fade into irrelevance. This isn't laziness, it's emotional dislocation. Psychologists refer to it as anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things that once sparked joy. It's a subtle but devastating shift, one that transforms passions into chores, hobbies into burdens. In the Jungian view, this marks a severance from the self, the totality of who we are, including what we are called to become. When a man is no longer in relationship with his instincts, his imagination, or his creativity, he becomes estranged not just from joy, but from his very identity. He may continue to function in the world, but inside, he's a ghost walking through a house of mirrors, surrounded by distorted reflections of who he used to be. Nietzsche once warned of a world where men would become last men, beings who no longer strive, who no longer burn, who only wish to be safe and comfortable. In many ways, the quiet loss of joy in men mirrors this decay of the spirit. Safety over aliveness, control over chaos, numbness over ecstasy. And it's dangerous, not because it leads to death, but because it leads to a life that feels already dead. What makes this particular habit so haunting is that it often feels irreversible. The spark is gone, and he can't remember how to light it again. He doesn't miss the activity. He misses who he was when he loved it. He doesn't mourn the guitar. He mourns the man who couldn't wait to play it. He doesn't miss the trail. He misses the boy inside him who once stood on mountaintops and felt infinite. And this is how the soul withers, not through catastrophe, but through the quiet absence of desire. When you are tired, rest, don't quit. But when rest no longer restores you, it's not the body that's weary, it's the soul. He sleeps 8 hours, maybe more, but still wakes up feeling like he hasn't slept at all. He drinks coffee, but it barely helps. He rests on weekends, but there's no real recovery. He takes a vacation, yet returns just as hollow as before. This is not the kind of tired that sleep cures. This is the weight of a life that's lost inner alignment. Psychologists call this phenomenon psychogenic fatigue, chronic mental and emotional exhaustion that stems not from physical overwork, but from suppressed emotion, lack of purpose, and internal fragmentation. In Carl Jung's terms, this exhaustion is the price of disconnection from the unconscious. When a man represses the truths he doesn't want to face, his fears, his longings, his doubts, those truths don't disappear. They turn into weight, and he carries that weight all day, every day. His life may appear stable, but inside there is a battle, and battles, even unspoken ones, drain energy. There's another layer, the fatigue of performance. Many men are taught from a young age to appear strong, composed, in control. But this emotional armor comes at a cost. Pretending to be okay becomes a full-time job. The nervous system is in a near constant state of quiet vigilance, faking peace while suppressing pain. Over time, that inner labor wears down the body. Rollo May, the great existential psychologist, described this kind of exhaustion as a symptom of emptiness disguised as drive. When we strive without soul, we collapse without warning. And still, society applauds these men. He's always working. He never stops. He's a machine. But no one asks what that machine runs on, or how close it is to breaking down. And that's the tragedy, that we normalize this kind of tiredness, as if it's a necessary tax on masculinity, as if it's not a crisis in slow motion. Because when joy disappears, what's left isn't sadness. It's a constant low-grade fatigue that fogs every thought, numbs every experience, and makes even small tasks feel like monumental effort. According to Søren Kierkegaard, when a man is in despair, it is because he refuses to become who he truly is. It begins subtly, a skipped shave, a missed workout, takeout instead of cooking. But over time, neglect compounds. The clothes become looser, more indifferent. The meals become fuel, not nourishment. The mirror becomes something to avoid. He tells himself he's just tired, that he's too busy, that it doesn't matter anymore. But it does, because how we treat our body is how we signal to the soul that we still care. In psychological terms, this is called self-abandonment, a slow disconnection from the habits that once grounded us in dignity and intention. It is often a symptom, not a cause, a ripple effect of internal emptiness that shows itself in the outer world. Carl Jung believed that when the ego detaches from the deeper self, it drifts into what he called psychic inflation or fragmentation. The man no longer acts from wholeness. He becomes a shell in motion, productive perhaps, but unanchored. And so the most basic acts of self-honor begin to fall away. He stops moving his body not because it hurts, but because there's no longer a reason to move. He stops eating well, not because he wants to die, but because he's forgotten what it means to feel alive. This isn't about vanity, it's about sacred responsibility, to bathe, to stretch, to walk in the sun, to breathe deeply. These are not indulgences, they are acts of self-remembering. In the words of philosopher Michel Foucault, care of the self was once the foundation of wisdom, a way of tending to the soul by tending to the body. But in modern life, especially for men, self-care is often miscast as weakness, as something feminine, as something optional, and so they let themselves go, not just physically, but spiritually, not out of laziness, but because deep down they don't feel worth caring for anymore. And nothing steals joy faster than the quiet belief that you no longer deserve to feel good. Beware the barrenness of a busy life. He's always doing something, another project, another meeting, another errand that can't wait. To the outside world he looks motivated, driven even. But the truth is harder to admit. He's running from a silence he's afraid to sit in. This is the paradox of modern masculinity, that many men don't slow down because they're strong, but because they're terrified of what will surface when they stop. Psychologists describe this pattern as overcompensation, the unconscious attempt to mask emotional emptiness with constant activity. It's a distraction strategy. If he stays busy enough, maybe he won't have to feel. Maybe he won't have to notice that joy has quietly left the room. Carl Jung called this a form of psychic avoidance, a misalignment between the outer performance and the inner reality. The persona, the mask a man wears to function in society, becomes fused with his identity. He begins to believe he is his productivity. His worth becomes measured in what he can achieve, not in who he truly is. And so, he fills his calendar but empties his soul. He stays in motion because motion feels like meaning. He stays engaged because quiet feels like collapse. But what he's really avoiding isn't laziness, it's grief. Grief for the things he didn't say, for the love he couldn't express, for the years he spent becoming who the world wanted, instead of who he actually is. Philosopher Alan Watts warned against this mechanical way of living. No valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now. Yet busyness keeps him suspended in the illusion of control. If the day is full, the mind can't wander. If the mind can't wander, the truth can't surface. And that's the real tragedy. Not that he's working too hard, but that he's building a life designed to keep him from feeling. It's a beautiful prison, and joy cannot survive in captivity. Man is not disturbed by things, but by the view he takes of them. Epictetus. He didn't used to be this way. He used to hope, to dream, to believe things would work out. Now he scoffs at optimism. He rolls his eyes at good news. He trusts nothing, not people, not plans, not life. This isn't cynicism born of insight. It's pessimism born of quiet despair. He doesn't expect the worst because he's wise, but because joy has become too dangerous to believe in. Disappointment taught him that hope has a cost, and so he stopped hoping altogether. Psychologists call this shift learned helplessness, when a person internalizes failure, loss, or emotional pain to the point that they no longer expect change. Even when the door is open, they don't walk through it, because they've learned that doors don't lead anywhere worth going. Carl Jung might say that this is the result of a man turning his back on the archetype of the hero, the part of him that moves forward, confronts chaos, and transforms pain into growth. Instead, he collapses inward. He adopts a worldview where nothing is sacred, nothing is worth trying for, and most of all, nothing ever gets better. The danger here is spiritual erosion. Pessimism isn't just a mood, it's a lens, and once it's in place, everything becomes tinted with futility. He sees people laughing and assumes they're pretending. He hears someone express passion and assumes they'll be disappointed. He watches others try and silently wonders, what's the point? Nietzsche warned of this drift. He called it passive nihilism. A quiet resignation to meaninglessness, not through rage or rebellion, but through emotional surrender. But the problem with pessimism isn't just what it does to your thoughts, it's what it does to your future. Because the moment you stop believing in the possibility of light, you stop walking toward it. And no man finds joy if he's convinced in advance that it doesn't exist. According to Carl Jung, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Joy doesn't scream when it leaves, it whispers, then waits. It waits in the quiet hour before dawn. In the lump in your throat you pretend not to feel. In the ache behind your eyes when no one's watching. The tragedy of losing joy is not that it vanishes overnight, it's that you slowly forget it ever belonged to you in the first place. And yet, the disappearance of joy is not the end. It's an invitation to descend, not into despair, but into depth. Carl Jung believed that healing is not about becoming better, but becoming whole. And wholeness requires confrontation with our forgotten longings, with our shadow, with the masks we wear and the selves we've buried. Because the modern man is not suffering from weakness, he's suffering from disconnection. Disconnected from his body, so he no longer feels. Disconnected from his friends, so he no longer shares. Disconnected from his passions, so he no longer creates. Disconnected from himself, so he no longer remembers who he is. But joy, real joy, is not a reward. It's not earned through perfection, or productivity, or performance. It's remembered. It lives in the same place it always did. In music that moves you for no reason, in a phone call where nothing needs to be fixed, in standing barefoot in the grass, staring at the sky like it's speaking just to you. Philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the unthinkable, said it best. Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue, as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. And this is where the journey back to joy begins, not with adding more, but by removing what never belonged, the expectations, the endless busyness, the belief that being vulnerable makes you weak, the story that says you must suffer in silence. You are not broken, you are buried, beneath routine, beneath performance, beneath years of emotional armor, but the soul remembers, and if you're quiet enough, it will speak. So sit still, feel the ache, look at the habits that slowly drained you dry, then take one step, just one, toward what lights you up, no matter how small. Joy does not return like a flood, it returns like a flicker, a candle, a breath, a choice, and every time you choose yourself again, the light grows.